All right, let's open in a word of prayer. Lord, thanks so much for your day. Pray that you'll help us to wade through some of these important issues that are facing us in the world today. And bless our time together. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, I did the sermon first hour, and I talked a lot about AI and Paul on Mars Hill, and I think you're probably wondering, how did you come up with that? And I can say I came up with it on my own. It wasn't generated by ChatGPT or generative AI or anything like that. There is so much going on right now. This is sort of like how my head was a lot of days this week as things were kind of swirling around. In it, I probably watched and edited 30 hours or more of videos, so you don't have to. And you're welcome. But there were a lot of things going on. So today we're going to talk about some AI stuff that I think is, if you didn't know the Lord, it should scare you to death. It's still very concerning with the way things are going. Some important people talking about things. So we'll do that. We'll talk a little bit about COP28 and some of the significant things that happened there. And then we'll talk about Israel and the war in the Middle East. So I'll try to cover as much as I can in the time that I have. And I would go for hours, but we have people that, the staff, they're very, very helpful, but they like to go eat lunch and stuff like that. So there's nothing, they're just hard to control that way. And, it's... So this slide I used to use about a year ago about all the little converging events that we see and things that are coming and things that have happened in the past, some of which are going to recapitulate themselves as we get closer and closer to the end and the return of the Lord. So this is my grid: acceleration, convergence, logistics, and understanding. Often reference this verse in Daniel chapter 12 about, as I think the book will be unsealed, and as we get closer to the end, we'll have a better understanding. At least that's my view of it, and I think that we see a lot of things every week that are very difficult to understand. This quote is attributed to Lenin. I'm not a big reader of Lenin's stuff, but said there are decades where nothing happens and there are weeks where decades happen. And I think we're really at the latter part of that things happen very, very quickly now. Things change dramatically. Now, some things are encouraging. The world is not at war right now, but it could devolve into that very, very quickly with this thing in the Middle East. So here's a little thing. The New York Times did a thing called the DealBook Summit this week, and they had a lot of important people there. Jason Wang from NVIDIA, don't have any videos from him. Elon Musk, I have some of his videos because I think what he said was pretty important in terms of AI and where things are going. I also want to set the context with some things. And so this is Jamie Dimon, CEO of the largest bank in the world, JP Morgan. And he was speaking at the New York Times DealBook Summit. Here's a little bit of what he had to say. And the sound should come on here in a minute, guys.
Well, you said, this may be the most dangerous time the world has seen in decades.
Right.
It doesn't feel that way in some ways when you walk around on the street, but why do you think it's the most dangerous time?
So first of all, again, welcome everybody. If you look at history and you open a newspaper of any month, of any year, of course there's always tough stuff going on, wars and depressions and recessions. But if you look at this time and what's happening in Ukraine, a 600-mile front, a free and democratic European nation, 600,000 casualties, huge humanitarian crisis, NATO on the border of NATO, nuclear blackmail, and it's affecting all oil and gas migration, food costs, and all international military and economic relationships. That's pretty tough. And that was before the terrorist attack in Israel. And so I look at those things as it's dangerous. And we need to get through it. Now, hopefully, it'll all go away. But if you look at the history of battles like this, they're unpredictable. You don't know the full effect. And so, and I've spoken to a lot of people. I think you've talked to Condi Rice and Bob Gates and some of the military folks. They would say the same thing. This is really complex, and obviously it's affecting America and China.
So there you go. So we'll make Mr. Diamond our guest prophecy updater this week with what he had to say. I don't really go looking for things like that. I just happen to say, oh, here's Jamie Dimon, and JP Morgan's a big employer here locally, one of the largest office buildings in the country, just down the road a little bit. So I thought, I'll listen to what he has to say, because he's pretty important, in terms of banking and finance and the economy and everything. And he says, this is really a time like no other. He's been around a while. I don't know what his age is. I think he's around my age, which big success I was compared to him, huh? And sorry, Pam. But so I found this, I thought this was an interesting thing about AI and algorithms and that type of thing. So let's remember where these guys are coming from. This is Yuval Harari, play this clip a lot. 2015, Silicon Valley, Google headquarters. And here's what he had to say.
It's a pleasure to be here also, not only to visit Ran and Ariel, but also to be in Silicon Valley, which for me is a kind of special place as a historian. As a historian, I focus mainly on the history of ideas, ideology, mythology, religion. And I think that the most interesting place in the world today, in religious terms, is Silicon Valley. Not the Middle East, not Syria or Afghanistan or Israel or Jerusalem, but Silicon Valley. This is where the new religions that will take over the world are being formulated.
Yeah, and then here's Klaus Schwab in Chicago in 2019.
Now, the fourth industrial revolution is not just a prolongation of this digitalization, it's much more. It's a combination of technologies. It's not just the digital technology. Just think of genetics, think of brain research, and so on. And the power of the fourth industrial revolution comes from the combination of all those technologies. Actually, I was saying it's at the end what the fourth industrial revolution will lead to is a fusion of our physical, our digital, and our biological identities.
And they're working hard at that. They're also, earlier this week, I did an interview, by the way, if you want to look for it on Stand Up for the Truth. They have a YouTube channel. You can also get the podcast. I did a Thursday hour with Mary Danielson, and we talked some about some of these issues that were coming up. One of the articles we talked about was the former Google CEO of speaking at the Axios AI Plus conference in DC on Tuesday. And when I was talking to Mary on Thursday, I said, well, there was this conference a couple weeks ago, and wait a minute, it was 2 days ago, because there have been so many other things that were going on with Israel and everything else. It just seems like time's all messed up. Because things are happening so quickly. But he said, look, AI guardrails aren't enough to prevent harm. This is an existential threat. So I'm going to go through some quotes from Eric Schmidt, another one from Yuval Harari, some articles, and then we'll do a few clips of Elon Musk, because I think these are very important things, issues related to end times and how this Mark of the Beast technology and things are coming about. Here is Eric Schmidt speaking.
I've recently been working very hard to try to understand what's true and what's being made up by the usual marketing people, of which I'm an example of somebody who just makes stuff up. And I think the rough statement is that we are building systems that can do things that humans can't do, but only things that humans can initiate. And there's a couple of examples that I'll offer, and I'll say these rhetorically. Why do we not have an AI doctor that works with nurse practitioners, medical professionals all around the world to bring initially basic medical knowledge, but then ultimately the kind of standard of medical knowledge that we have here in our country to the entire world in their local languages? It's obvious. It's an obvious product to build. Okay, so you think that's a bad idea. Why don't you just take every student in the world and give them an AI tutor, which is not a substitute for a teacher, but works with the teachers in their language to bring them up and learn in whatever way they learn best to their ultimate potential. I defy you to argue that an AI doctor for the world and an AI tutor is net negative. It just has to be good.
Okay, so argument number one, Eric, would be we don't trust lunatics like you who are letting this stuff develop without guardrails. I mentioned in the sermon, and I can't remember where I saw this. I'd have to Google it to find it, I guess, or do a search for it. But there was an AI system that was trying to get into something that they didn't want it to get into. It had a CAPTCHA block. You know, those crazy things, I hate them whenever I try to log into something. Please select all the stop signs, please. And you can't tell. I mean, the one where it's got just like a little tiny corner of the stop sign, does that count? Or the motorcycle, you know, and there's one that has like a part of a guy's foot on a pedal. Is that part of the motorcycle or not? And so computers have trouble figuring that out. So this computer was having trouble getting to where it wanted to go because it knew that there was something more that it could access behind this CAPTCHA. So it actually went out and wrote up a job request and advertised it on the internet and hired somebody, a human, to help it get around the CAPTCHA. And that's the problem with these systems is we don't know what they're going to do. I'm just telling you that a lot of people, other than a very rich lunatic named Eric Schmidt, the argument is why you don't want students to have just their own personal AI tutor is because it's stuff that you made up. It's stuff that you allowed to get out there. And so he'll talk about the problem with this. By the way, in the next segment, he's going to talk about a book that he wrote and articles that he wrote with a guy named Henry Kissinger, The Age of AI and Our Human Future, that was published a couple years ago. And in this book, he talked about, or in this next clip, if I play it long enough, if I don't, I'll cut it off, but I will tell you what it's about. They mentioned Dr. Kissinger. This was Tuesday. And they were talking about, well, you know, in 5 years, this may be a bigger problem, and Dr. Kissinger will be 105. Well, that didn't last, but what, a day? Dr. Kissinger died at 100. I found this was one of the images that I got where Kissinger, the birthday cake, the icing is melting. Chile, Cyprus, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, Iran, East Timor, Bangladesh. And, you know, there were a lot of very vicious obituaries written about Henry Kissinger, many of which I would agree with. But I thought this sort of, like that picture of Zbigniew Brzezinski that I like to put up. And it also, there was, in the discussion, somebody wrote a book about Dr. Kissinger. He lived to 100, and so the title of his biography was The Good Die Young. Now that, I love it when people are creative like that. So here's Eric Schmidt and the other guy, I can't remember his name right off the tip, Mike Allen, at the Axios AI Plus Summit talking about AI.
The term in the industry is called guardrails. And what you do is you put limitations on what the system can do. And that's for protection as well as because they make errors. My favorite example is Dr. Kissinger and I were writing an article, and Dr. Kissinger, who's like a proper, academic, among other things, said he had all sorts of citations. So he said to the system, write me this and then give me the citations. that were his, right? And it turns out it wrote very well what he said, and all of its citations it made up. It made up all of his articles, right? It has no notion of fact. And you can try this yourself. It's very entertaining. So all of these are being adjusted with various algorithms. The technical tool that is used is called tools, right? The idea is that the large language model can call out for an answer. Another example is it doesn't multiply very well. It learned by multiplying by predicting the next number in a sequence, which is not a very accurate way of doing math, trust me. But you can call out to a system that can answer your question, and then you can put it back in. So that's how these systems will become more reliable. There is a complete agreement that there are systems and scenarios which are dangerous. And in all of the big models, the ones that you encounter, again, we're using GPT, you'll see this with Bard, you'll see this with Claude 2, you'll see this with Inflection, you'll see this with et cetera. All of them have groups that basically look at the guardrails and they put constraints on it. They say, thou shalt not talk about death. You know, the taste of winning is there. If you look at the UK event, which I was part of, the UK government took the bait, took the ideas, decided to lead. They're very good at this. And they came out with very sensible guidelines. And because the US and the UK have worked really well together, there's a group within the National Security, NSC here, that is particularly good at this. And they got it right, and that produced this EO, which is the longest EO I think in histories of executive orders, which says that each of the aspects of our government are to get organized around this. If you look at what we're doing collectively, it's not enough. We're not claiming this is the end solution, but it's the beginning. And I want to emphasize that what you see in the media is you see people who don't really understand this get completely panicked, like we're going to build bombs and kill everybody, which we're precisely not doing, so we're clear. It is true that eventually we will have these problems, and I'm now convinced, and this is what I want to say clearly, we're going to be fine for some years. And the reason we're going to be fine is you got lots of smart people, lots of money, lots of consequences, people paying attention. When you become not fine is when the computers can begin to set their own objective function.
Okay, how many years is some years?
It depends.
Are we talking about like 1 or 5?
Well, the answer 2 years ago was 20 years from 2 years ago. And it had always been 20 years from 2 years ago. It now looks like it's 10 or less.
From today?
From today. And there are people who believe it's 2, 3, 4 years. There are people who think it's 10 years. I'm going to say 5 to 10.
Okay, so let's say 5. So that's 2028. Mm-hmm. Henry Kissinger will be 105. What are you afraid will happen by 2028-ish? So a simple example is today, even if the computer AI system is doing something bad, and we agree it's bad, a human made it do it. So in the next year, this conversation is not going to be very relevant because you're going to be awash in copyright misinformation, election interference, so forth. Those are going to drive everybody crazy, globally, by the way, not just in the US. It's sort of terrible. But we can't really fix that one because that technology is all out. So what I worry about is the point at which the computer can start to make its own decisions to do things. And a simple example would be, imagine you have a supercomputer, you've got a whole bunch of guards around it and so forth, and one day it discovers access to weapons. And we don't know that such a system would tell us the truth.
So, but don't worry about it, right? What's to worry about? We don't know what's going on, and everybody who's panicking doesn't understand. But I understand it, but I don't know what's going on. And then, so he wants an argument about whether we should allow an AI tutor for each kid. Are you kidding me? I defy you to give me an argument. Eric, we just listened to what you said, and what you said scares a lot of us to death because there are no guardrails. Here's Yuval Harari a couple months ago with The Economist.
So let's take 5 years, 2028. What does the world look like In the next 5 years, the frontier model companies, those of us at the very cutting edge who are training the very largest AI models, are going to train models that are over 1,000 times larger than what you currently see. Instead of just generate new text in a one shot, the model will be able to generate a sequence of actions over time. And I think that that's really the character of AI that we'll see in the next 5 years, artificial capable AIs.
So Yuval, a man who doesn't use a smartphone very much, you listen to this. Does this fill you with horror, and do you agree with it?
I would take it very seriously. I don't know. I'm not coming from within the industry, so I cannot comment on how likely it is to happen. But when I hear this as a historian, for me, what we just heard, this is the end of human history. Not the end of history, the end of human-dominated history. History will continue with somebody else in control. Because what we just heard is basically Mustafa telling us that in 5 years, there'll be a technology that can make decisions independently and that can create new ideas independently. This is the first time in history we confronted something like this.
And so here's some of the things that they're getting. DNA database, access to everybody's DNA. I'm sure they're not going to do anything. They're not going to mess around there, right? Oh, wait a minute. We just been through that, haven't we? And maybe more is coming. Here's something else. AI discovers that materials is set up to power up batteries in computers. AI has been able to go out and identify crystals that will allow computers to operate more effectively. 2.2 million crystals that they've identified this week. Do you really think anybody's slowing this down? This has, believe me, from a Christian premillennial perspective, this has Mark of the Beast technology stamped all over it, does it not? This is Maureen Dowd. Now, Maureen Dowd is a lefty lunatic, writes for the New York Times, but this is the title of her editorial in this morning's New York Times. Sam Altman sugarcoating annihilation. Listen to what she says in her opening 2 paragraphs. My favorite Twilight Zone episode is the one where aliens land and a sign of their peaceful intentions give world's leaders a book. Government cryptographers work to translate the alien language. They decipher the title to serve man. And that's reassuring. So interplanetary shuttles are set up. But as the cryptographers proceed, they realize too late that it's a cookbook. That, dear readers, is the story of OpenAI. Now, so listen, even Maureen Dowd will swerve into it every now and then, and we ought to give her credit and hope. So here's this is also in the Financial Times. DeepMind AI opens shortcut to Marvel materials by finding 2 million new crystals. What have I told you recently? There are 200 million biological proteins. After they spent a couple years figuring out, within a couple of weeks, they were able to get the 3-dimensional structure of all 200 million. It used to take a PhD research scientist 5 years full time to come up with one. So in a couple weeks, they compressed a billion years of PhD research time to a couple of weeks. I stand by my thing that I put in my update acceleration. So here's Elon Musk. He was at the Book Deal OpenAI, or the Book Deal Summit, Deal Book Summit, New York Times. And so these are, if you want the whole thing, you can find it on the internet. It's like an hour and a half. He does have a medallion on, like a dog tag, that says bring them home. He went to Israel. I think he went to Israel this past week, then he flew to New York. I guess he can do that. I guess when you're the richest guy in the world, you can kind of fly around whenever you want, on whatever you want. But the interesting thing about Elon, and I'm not a fan, okay? There are problems here, and I think you'll be able to see some of this. But when I watch him recently, he kind of has this far off look in his eyes. Like, okay, as soon as I'm done with this dweeb interviewing me, I'm going to get on the horn and I'm going to call SpaceX and ask them, is the rocket to Mars ready to leave? Because I want to be on it. That's the way, I just get this impression. If you look behind his eyes, I think that that's what he's thinking. But he can correct me if I'm wrong. Here you go.
Where are you with your own AI efforts relative to where you think OpenAI is, where you think Google is, where you think the others are?
I mean, on the AI front, I'm in somewhat of a quandary here because I've thought AI could be something that would change the world in a significant way since I was in college. I mean, like 30 years ago. So the reason I didn't go build AI was because I was uncertain about which edge of the double-edged sword would be sharper, the good edge or the bad edge. So I held off on doing anything on AI. I could have created, I think, the leading AI company, and kind of OpenAI actually kind of is that. Because I was just uncertain, if you make this magic genie, what will happen? You know, Starlink, mostly single-edged good. I mean, giving people better connectivity to people that, you know, don't have connectivity or it's too expensive, I think is very, you know, very much a good thing. Starlink was instrumental, by the way, in halting the Russian advance, and the Ukrainians said so. So, you know, I think but with AI, you've got the magic genie problem. You may think you want a magic genie, but once that genie's out of the bottle, it's hard to say what happens.
How far are we away from that genie being out of the bottle, you think? We think it's already out?
I mean, the genie is certainly poking its head out.
The AGI, the idea of artificial general intelligence, given what you now are working on yourself, and you know how easy or hard it is to train, to create the inferences, to create the weights. I hope I'm not getting too far in the weeds of just how this works, but those are the basics behind the software end of this.
Yeah, I mean, data is very important. You could say data is probably more valuable than gold.
But then maybe you have the gold in X in a different way. In a way, again, that I don't know if the public appreciates what that means.
Yes, X is might be the single best source of data. I mean, it is, there are more, you know, links that go to, people click on more links to X than anything else on Earth.
So elsewhere in that interview, he says, how long? 3 years. So he would disagree with Eric Schmidt, and he doesn't say. So there are some things. This was interesting in the Netherlands. Geert Wilders got enough votes. Now, I don't know the status of it. He was allowed to be able to form the parliament. He gave a very interesting speech. He said, listen, we don't need to create a two-state solution. Jordan is Palestine. So go live there. And immediately everybody says, oh, he's this terrible far-right guy. And the subject came up on Bill Maher this week with James Carville. And I apologize. I think I got the word bleeped. It's the only one that I heard, and I missed it. I apologize. It's the way people talk. And so here's Carville talking about Mike Johnson, who's from Louisiana, like Carville, Mike Johnson being the new majority leader of the U.S. House of Representatives. And here's the interview.
So, Mike Johnson, He's from your home state of Louisiana, the Speaker of the House. I read today he wrote a foreword in a book that subscribes to conspiracy theories and homophobic insults. I thought, Mike Johnson wrote the foreword to the Bible? Do you think Mike Johnson can hold his party together now that he has taken the mantle?
Well, first of all, I don't think he can hold his party together. Second of all, you're exactly right. Mike Johnson and what he believes is one of the greatest threats we have today to the United States. I promise you, I know these people.
Well, you're talking about Christian nationalism.
Absolutely.
Talking about
This is a bigger threat than Al-Qaeda to this country. And let me tell you something. The Speaker of the House, they got probably at least 2 Supreme Court justices, maybe more. Right? Don't kid yourself. And people in the press have no idea who this guy is, how he was formed, what the threat is, and this is a fundamental threat to the United States. It is a fundamental. They don't believe in the Constitution. They'll tell you that. Mike Johnson himself says, "What is democracy but 2 wolves and a lamb having lunch?" That's what they really, really, really believe. And to say, "Oh, come on, man, that's just some crazy shit." No. They believe that, and they're coming, and they've been doing it forever. They're funded. They're relentless. And, they probably won't win for a while, but they might. No, and if they do, the whole country blows a gasket.
I would take it more seriously if he wasn't wearing a pink Marine Corps sweatshirt. Probably one of the main guys, the reason why we're in the trouble we're in right now. So I guess pray for him, but really pray for Mary Matlin, his wife. Here's the mayor of Chicago talking about, well, why are we having the problems in Chicago? Listen to what this guy has to say.
What we've seen is a very raggedy form instituted by right-wing extremism. Everyone knows that the right-wing extremism in this country has targeted democratically ran cities. And quite frankly, they've been very intentional about going after democratically ran cities that are led by people of color. And their whole motivation is to create disruption and chaos, because that's what that particular party has been about. Right? This is the same political party that did not want to accept that President Obama was actually an American. It's the same Republican right-wing extreme.
Okay, he's a lunatic. Okay, who were leading the riot? Who were leading the riots in Chicago that we've seen for the last few years? White nationalists? Christian white nationalists? Come on. What a liar. Have people been targeted in Chicago? Yeah, like lunatic left-wing Soros-funded prosecutors, who, by the way, believe Jesse Smollett, who, by the way, had to go back to prison this week because his appeal was denied. Melanie Phillips says it's not far right to want curbs on immigration. And this is interesting. In Denmark, they're raising migrant ghettos, and they're taking the issue away from the far right, that's fine if they're doing that. Then they're kind of getting religion. I have a little bit more to say about this. What's going on in London and Sweden and Norway, it's with certain groups of people who come from other countries is unbelievable. It's tearing apart societies. I read articles this week. In France, they believe they're on the verge of civil war. It's sort of like, if I remember, I'll make a smart aleck comment about something else. In Ireland, they had all these riots, and they came out, and what they did was they invoked this new law, Digital Services Act, first one in Europe to do that. And so what did they do? Well, they had a person that didn't grow up in Ireland stabbed children at a school, and people got upset with it, and they said, we don't like these people coming that don't share our values. And so what did the Irish government do? They arrested the people who were complaining about the guy who stabbed the person, the children. And their mothers all over Europe said, listen, our daughters are not safe. And if you see you'll see in a minute what happened. This is kind of this is a editorial cartoon in the Times of London. And see what you see is the White Cliffs of Dover and the bird lands and what's he land on? Immigration papers. The White Cliffs of Dover are now made up of immigration papers. That was pretty good. So they've had these riots in Dublin and that. This is an editorial in the Times of London. Churches risking rule by illiberal evangelicals. Wars and rumors of war, you've seen a big shift in this now. A lot of people are saying that Russia's going to win, and even The Economist has said this, a Western scheme to limit Russian oil revenues by capping the price for its crude at $60 a barrel has failed because a parallel trading structure has emerged beyond the reach of the West. The price of Urals crude from Russia is $64, up nearly 10% since the start of 2023. So it's not working. And even now Cameron comes out and says NATO is too strong for Russia. And I suppose if you believe in a revived Roman Empire that you would get excited about that. But then there are other articles that talk about the fact that Russia's winning. So let's talk about, here's one article, talks about EU ports reship more than 20% of LNG imports from Russia. So the gas crisis had emerged, and even Putin came out a couple months ago now and said, hey, you didn't really destroy all of Nord Stream, all 4 pipelines. There's still one that's operational. We could have it running tomorrow if you wanted it. So let's talk about Israel, and there was a truce. There are over 100 hostages released, mostly women, children, and some Thai men who were migrant workers there in the south of Israel. The propaganda is unbelievable. So people take a video and they capture the video where the hostage may have smiled, and they say, look how happy they are. All the hostages were happy to be with their great captors, Hamas. They love them. And even one girl, they said, look at her. I think she wants to marry those guys. This is sickness. And if you see people who claim to be Christians talking about this or sharing this, pray for them and leave them alone, because they have completely lost the plot on everything. And again, everything is the war in Gaza extracts a heavy toll on children. What's this one? Here's the article I had. Sorry, my slides were a little out of order. Europe would be washed away in war with Russia. That's from the Times of the United Kingdom. Just the other day. Probably not too inaccurate. One of the biggest problems coming into focus is logistics, because Europe just hasn't been spending money on defense for a while. Putin's sending more guys there. He called up another 170,000. That brings him up to about 1.3 million. COP28. Real quick about this. I talked a little bit about this first hour. If you go to the app and you download the app, what do you have? This is the app of the Green Zone Energy Hub. And they have a digital art work. And here is the one that you see when you walk in. It's a tree of life. That's what they call it on their own app. This is our tree of life. Do you think there's not a Mother Earth worshiping religion behind all of the stuff that's going on? Exactly. And they're trying to bring all religions together. Here's a thing this morning about the This guy, you may recognize him. He is the leading Sunni theologian on the planet, Sunni Islam. He is the president or head of the Al-Azhar University in Cairo, the leading Sunni theological institution on the planet. And you might recognize him. He talks about the fact that, well, I would like to be there, and I would like to be there with my good friend who's not able to be there today because my good friend is ill, but he'll be sending a video to welcome you to COP28. And he talks about how climate change is important. Then he goes on to talk about the war in Gaza and never mentions the Hamas atrocities. It's what Israel's doing is bad. But then he goes on and he says, here's my good friend. And this is where you might recognize him from, is this guy. Remember that 2019 and Abu Dhabi and the United Arab Emirates, he signed a document on human fraternity with this guy, Pope Francis. And you can see Francis has some lung issues and he's struggling to breathe. I think he's 85 or so now, so he's getting up there. But he talks about we need to work together in all of this. And remember, at the end, they talk about, they signed this document like they signed in Abu Dhabi in 2019. Now they're signing this joint mission thing, head of the Catholic Church, Francis. And then you'll see this guy signing it as the head of the Muslim Council of Elders. And it talks about our, let's see here, Global Faith Leaders Summit Interfaith Statement for COP28. And remember, it was the Abu Dhabi thing that led to this building being built, this structure, the Abrahamic House of Faith in Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates. The COP28 is taking place up the road. Here's a picture of all the people that were there. Everybody's giving a speech. John Kerry, Anthony Guterres. They're going to cut down on green. They want to make green farming practices and limit your meat, particularly you people in the West who are eating meat. And of course, King Charles was there. Here's what King Charles had to say a little bit.
I pray with all my heart that COP28 will be another critical turning point towards genuine transformational action at a time when already, as scientists have been warning for so long, we are seeing alarming tipping points being reached. The dangers are no longer distant risks. I have seen across the Commonwealth and beyond countless communities which are unable to withstand repeated shocks, whose lives and livelihoods are laid waste by climate change. Surely, real action is required to stem the growing toll of its most vulnerable victims. Repeated cyclones batter vulnerable island nations like Vanuatu and Dominica. India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan have been experiencing unprecedented floods, and East Africa is suffering a decades-long drought. This past summer, in common with Spain, Greece, the United States, and many other countries, Canada experienced its most severe wildfire season on record, with 18.5 million.
Well, okay, I can see people are dropping. I'm dropping off right now. Myself, I'm falling asleep. So here's an article by Mark Jeftovic talking about, well, experts suggest that your standard of living needs to be reduced by 85%. That's kind of a dramatic reduction. Imagine the impact that'll have on the economy. But it's okay because you're not going to own anything and you're still going to be happy. But one of the things they want to limit is your travel. So it was interesting, it's sort of divine justice, I guess, that a number of the private jets that were going to go to COP28 from Europe, from Munich, were actually frozen to the runway in a winter storm. Praise the Lord for that, right? Yeah, by the way, they all flew in on these jets. They had, they thought they were going to have 40,000, then it was 60, now it was 80, and I heard today 100,000 people attended this thing in the United Arab Emirates. And then everybody was complaining, well, why are you having a petrostate host a climate conference? And the head of energy in the United Arab Emirates issued a statement or spoke at the conference today and said, listen, we're not getting away from hydrocarbons, just stop it. It's nonsense. So we're shutting down coal plants all over the West while China and other countries are building thousands of coal-fired electric plants, which you need if everybody's going to have an electric car, right? These people are lunatics. So there's this publication, A Sustainable Future for Travel. Tourists will need to be rerouted. Tour schedules will be changed because of the weather, and people start to question whether they should travel to certain locations. Hey, just do it virtually. We have to do this. The future laboratory, regenerative transformation has long been demanded by the planet. We must align, collaborate, and accelerate collective action and innovation to decarbonize travel. As only then we can do that. So they had this other publication, Future Travel Trends, using what? Artificial intelligence. AI can objectively plan every single microsegment of a journey. And I just use Google Maps. Yeah, if you find your luggage. By the way, Charles gave the speech and he wore a tie with Greek flag on it. And everybody's upset. There's this big controversy in England right now, UK, because in the British Museum are the Elgin marbles, which came from the Parthenon. They were taken from the Parthenon in Athens to England and have been in the British Museum all these years, and Greece wants them back. And one person with, I guess, a very good British sense of, well-refined British sense of humor said, well, we don't want to give them back. We don't want to give the Elgin marbles back to Greece because the last time they were there, somebody stole them. So they can't be trusted with their own stuff. Kind of an interesting take on things. So let's talk. I'm going to try to focus on okay, so I posted a picture of this little boy on my Facebook page. The father, they put up a video of him. Hamas has said that they killed the mother and 2 children. This is just egregious. I would highly recommend, they were releasing the hostages, but they're also finding out that there were others dead. I think there were another 6 or 7 identified this morning as likely dead that the people thought were hostages. I think we're going to find more of that. This is an interesting editorial. Why is the Me Too crowd silent on Hamas rape? And you go to the pro-Hamas channels, they go, none of that happened. None of that happened. There was I can't remember the lady, I think she was on Laura Ingraham the other night. I just caught the clip of it, and she said, I'm non-Jewish, and I went there to examine the bodies. The women were raped so badly that they had broken pelvises in many cases. Oh, it didn't happen. Oh, Israel's just making that up. It's all AI. There's a big controversy, too, back and forth between Israel and the U.S. We're kind of putting our noses in. Well, don't be too harsh. Don't bomb too many things. Although it doesn't seem consistent because we're also giving them, I think I have a thing here. We're giving them bunker busters. So, but then we're telling them, well, don't use them. So there's just a tremendous amount of propaganda out there. There was an attack in Jerusalem. I'm going to do a couple interviews with people in Jerusalem this week. I'll put up on the YouTube channel. At least that's a plan. Pray that those go well. There was an attack in Jerusalem. 4 were killed. They did shoot the Hamas terrorists. The Hamas came out and took credit for it. That's one of the reasons why the ceasefire came about. But tragically, one of the guys a citizen had pulled a gun and shot the terrorist dead, and then a soldier shot and killed him. And so you can watch the video on it. It's a terrible thing. Well, I'll talk to my friends about that. So, let's see. Oh, this is another rumor of war. Venezuela is threatening to go into Guyana. The border's been settled for 100 years, but now Russia and China are saying, hey, Venezuela, why don't you go take all their oil? They're oil rich. Go get some more of it. So now they're afraid there's going to be a war in South America. This is an article from Ynet, and it says Israel's going to have to be more clever the way they go about this. Energean, which is the company doing the offshore drilling, they've continued to operate throughout this, which is pretty amazing. They were shut down for a few days, but they have a couple warships protecting them. They're off the coast. They're near south of the Lebanon-Israel maritime border. Israel called off the truce. Everybody's mad at Erdogan because he's still supplying oil to Israel. So here are a couple clips I'm going to play that talk about, what's the U.S. role in this and how is Israel relating to that and the pressure from the U.S. First, this is from Anderson Cooper program on CNN.
CNN is reporting the Biden administration officials are talking to their Israeli counterparts about how to protect civilians in southern Gaza if, in fact, the IDF, ground operation moves into southern Gaza, where you have hundreds of thousands of people who have fled from the north. You reported today that Biden spoke to Netanyahu about his concerns about an Israeli movement into the south. What's your understanding of the outcome of that, if any?
Yeah, so I think I published earlier today on Axios a story that shows that the conversation between Biden and Netanyahu on Sunday, where that was sort of marketed to us as a phone call about the hostages, was not about the hostages. It was about Biden's main concern, and this is what happens if the pause ends and Israel resumes its operation in southern Gaza. And I think Biden told Netanyahu, according to U.S. officials, something very clear. He told him what happened in northern parts of Gaza cannot happen in the southern parts because you have 2 million Palestinians there. And the main thing Biden asked of Netanyahu is to hold consultations between the U.S. and Israel about the IDF's operational plans ahead of any operation in southern Gaza, and Netanyahu actually agreed.
The concern, of course, is, again, it's all these people who have fled the south. Israeli officials have said, well, there are members of Hamas who have also gone to the south because it's somewhat safer there and that there are tunnels there as well. How does Israel do a ground operation in southern Gaza with all those people there? Where are they supposed to go?
I totally agree with you, because I just don't see how Israel can really go on a serious operation in southern Gaza without creating huge civilian casualties and damage to infrastructure and you name it. Israeli officials I spoke to earlier today said, we have some plans for specific raids, for targeted airstrikes, so on and so forth. Again, I think it's going to be very, very dangerous and problematic.
Yeah, Barak Ravid, thanks so much.
So that's the guy who tweeted that, Barak Ravid. He sometimes is described as the official Israeli stenographer for White House, the information the White House wants to get out there. And he does seem to have an inside track to a lot of things. So the question is, is the U.S. interfering that much? Here is probably the leading light in our government, who was in Dubai for COP28, who weighed in on, what's the way out of this for Israel? Here you go.
Well, as I said we have to revitalize the Palestinian Authority, which means giving the support that is necessary for good governance, understanding that on the issues that must be resolved as we think of a plan for the day after, it is about good governance, which will bring transparency and accountability to the people of Gaza and the West Bank. It's also about what we need to do to recognize there must be some plan for security for the region, and I suspect as a plan develops, it will take into account interim and then longer term. And finally, what we must do in terms of rebuilding Gaza and a commitment to that.
And so, we really need to have accountability in the plan, and we have to plan the plan, plan the plan like you would plan any plan. Have I captured her? So here is a quote this morning I found on Twitter. Macron in Dubai. I think we have reached a moment when the Israeli authorities will have to define more clearly what their final objective is. The total destruction of Hamas? Does anybody think that's possible? If it's that, the war will last 10 years. And this is a problem. How is victory going to be defined? Now, at Ynet, there's another article. The mission is not to destroy or reduce Hamas. This is by, Ron Yeshai. If you go to Ynet, you can find the article, but go to Google Chrome or Brave browser and go to Ynet and type on, you can select English. That always helps to read what's in Hebrew if you don't read Hebrew. And so it's a big talk about what's to happen. Seth Frantzman responded to this tweet this morning about defeating Hamas is made more difficult by the fact that two of the West's closest allies in the region back or host Hamas. That's Qatar, and they likely know this, a tactical defeat in Gaza may be possible. On the larger level, it requires tectonic strategic changes. This is a very difficult thing that they're doing. What happens? So Kamala Harris and our government says, well, just reconstitute the Palestinian Authority. Because they can be trusted, right? There's no problem with them. I would highly recommend that this is Iranian propaganda pictures on the right. And you see how it shows they get all of Israel from the river to the sea. And then here, a great article today in the Gatestone Institute, why Belgium, there should be a link in our show notes to this article, why Belgium, Norway, Spain, and everyone should refrain from recognizing a Palestinian state just now. And you can go through this and you can see that it has always been the position of the Palestinian Authority to get rid of Israel and occupy everything from the river to the sea. It means something specific. It's not aspirational, as our certain congresswoman says. It's what they want to do. They want to wipe out Israel. So this is becoming a problem. You have people infiltrating from the West Bank, trying to get in Jerusalem, shot people, as I said, 4 dead at a bus stop in Jerusalem yesterday. And then if Israel goes into the West Bank and takes out a terror cell, look at how evil and mean Israel is. This is a very difficult thing. I think we're past the point where Israel has the support of the world in what they're dealing with. It's changed dramatically. So this article talks about the Palestinian Liberation Organization's 1974 10-point plan called the Phase Plan for the Comprehensive Liberation of All the Land Stretching from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean, from the river to the sea. It means the elimination of Israel. So I would highly recommend that you go get that. Again, these are just some propaganda pictures that you see. England, how they're responding to this. And then, of course, the Palestinian headgear in the shape of the nation, the whole nation of Israel. This was from Khomeini's page the other day. And so what it's like, the blood of the children that these people have caused, the IDF, Netanyahu, Gallant, Israeli leaders, And down below, you can see KKK hoods, Nazi symbols, and that type of thing. So this is how the Iranian propaganda is portraying everything. So the left article here, this is from today's Israel Hayom, is an article that says, we have gratitude for the USA, but its additional restrictive demands from Israel must be rejected. Even if the IDF, one of the moral armies in the world, is condemned and discredited all over the world, it is better to suffer 100 condemnations than to lose 100 soldiers. By the way, the death toll of Israeli soldiers is right at about 400, I believe. That includes the ones that were killed in the early stages of the October 7th attack. And the right article, it talks about, this is somebody who's like, listen, we got to get rid of Netanyahu. Everybody's upset with everybody. Caroline Glick has a very good article at jns.org talking about the head of the IDF, Aaron Haliva, has got to go. She said, most people, I guess they could stay around, but the intelligence, security, and other failures were so severe on October 7th that allows or caused this to happen. And then he came out, like Netanyahu came out and gave a speech and said, this is an existential threat to the country. And Haliva came out and said, no, it's not an existential threat. It's just another operation. This is what Caroline says in this article. 3 days later, in his first public remarks since October 7th, Haliva rejected Netanyahu's description of the war as an existential conflict. Speaking to graduates of the Intelligence Corps Officer Training Course, Haliva insisted it's a war we have no choice but to fight. It isn't an existential war. Caroline continues, the difference between an existential conflict and a non-existential conflict is self-evident. You must win a war for your state's existence. You can fight to a draw for a lesser conflict. An intelligence chief who publicly rejects the government's characterization of a war, whose poor professional judgment led to the catastrophe, and who has a history of contemptuous insubordination simply cannot be trusted to act in accordance with the government's directives. October 7th was not prevented because many people in positions of responsibility failed the people of Israel. In most cases, it is probably reasonable to wait until after the war to part ways with them. Haliva, however, needs to go now. So I appreciate her candor and honesty in the way that she approaches this. Again, this is America calling for restraint. Here's our bunker buster bombs. This is the article I wanted. This article in the New York Times the other day, troubling. It's very detailed. They said we looked at a plan that had been in the possession of Israel for about a year that detailed a lot of the details. It didn't have a date, didn't say when or anything like that. And there were people who were warning that were ignored by people in charge. Now, how far up it went, that still remains to be seen. But there were clearly people that missed this. If you have a podcast, go to Glenn Beck. Glenn Beck put up a podcast yesterday where he interviewed a young lady who had gone to the dance party that they had down there near the border fence. Her uncle was, they went to a bomb shelter when they kind of figured out what was going on. They were hiding in the bomb shelter. They kept coming by every 20 minutes or so, she said, and throwing grenades and Molotov cocktails into the 5x8 bomb shelter. And there were probably 40 people in there. 25 of them died. They survived by pulling the dead bodies on top of them, including her uncle, who was hit by shrapnel in the heart and died instantly. He was about 65 years old. By the way, her fiance said, I'm not going to that stupid party. It's too close to the fence. So people knew, but people just thought, well, Hamas isn't doing anything, and everybody figures we can control Palestinian Islamic Jihad, but boy, everybody sure was wrong on that. So this is a big problem. So if you want to get the New York Times article, It's out there. I might be able to put a free link up to it. It's usually behind a paywall. I'll try to put that in the description if it works. So this is all over the press now. Jerusalem Post has an article today about this. Israel's bombarding thing. This is interesting. This is the articles about Hamas is treating women and children like loot, says the IDF. What they're doing is just terrible. It's awful. So I've got just two more things and we'll quit. I know it's early. I'm not ill. I did preach first hour. So if you want to see some more about artificial intelligence and Paula Mars Hill and try to figure out why John Haller thinks they're kind of related, you can go there and if you disagree, fine. But I do think we live at a very incredible time. So anyway, this is an article from, I don't know if this is Times UK or The Guardian, Sunday Times in the UK. The Hamas fighters were raping her. She begged them for death. But anyway, the Glenn Beck podcast I would highly recommend talks about that. Now, Israel has released a map of areas that people can flee to avoid Israeli bombardment. And they published this. It's an app. You can download it on your cell phone and that type of thing. So some of the press in the West thinks, well, there's no power in Gaza. They can't do anything. Why are you giving them an app on a cell phone? They don't have any cell phones, way to recharge their phone. So Sky News asked an Israeli spokesperson, what's up with this? And I think this is a classic response. Here we go.
Very short of time. I'm so sorry that we're going to have to speed things up. We are about to run out of time. But I just wanted to ask you very quickly about that digital map. You're telling people where is going to be targeted next. People don't have power to power up their mobile phones. They haven't got Wi-Fi.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think you and all of your viewers saw our hostages being paraded through the streets as they were released to Israel over those 7 nights, and hundreds of Gazans holding their phones, videoing them. So clearly there's enough power to power their phones when they're parading our hostages throughout Gaza. Now that same power to their phones will be to get the maps, download the maps, look at the flyers, and don't forget, we're not only
Major Spielman, I'm so sorry. We are out of time, but we appreciate your comments this evening.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Here's the subtext of what that guy was like. You're starting to make too much sense even to a lefty idiot like me, and I have to cut you off. So this is what's going on. So, pray about the situation. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. This is very complicated, what needs to be done. There was even an article someplace today. Oh, here's one. Let's see. How do I... This is kind of interesting. In the New York Times this morning, ire towards Netanyahu may not lead to his ouster. So a lot of people written political obituaries. I don't think he'll survive, but a lot of people said he's gone beforehand. By the way, watch these people that are being released. There was this blonde terrorist who'd been in prison for slapping a soldier. She comes from a family in the area of East Jerusalem. And so in exchange for the hundreds or so hostages released by Hamas, Israel's had to release about 240 people, children and women being kept in jail, including this young lady. She was about 17 a couple years ago when she got put into prison. Her family is just a family of terrorists. They're just horrible, awful people. She's blonde curly hair. And of course, they come out immediately. Oh, she didn't do anything wrong. She was set up. They just put her in prison, because they wanted a pretty girl in prison. It's just, the propaganda is awful. And she is a despicable little human being. And these people are being released, and what do? They immediately call for the blood of Jews. that's how it's going. So this is a problem. So even though some of the people that were in prison being detained are like 14, they said, well, they were just throwing rocks. Well, have you ever seen the rocks that they throw? These things will kill you if they hit you in the head. And they do this all the time. And what is your response? How do you fight back against that? When we were there in 2017, a settler took out a gun. He had 40 or 50 people attacking his car, and he shot and killed 2 of them. And guess what? He got away. He was able to get home alive. So there's a lot of attacks going on. Pray for people over there. Pray for safety. It's a very difficult situation. There's a lot of territory in the south and the north that's been evacuated. A couple 100,000 people at Alma Israel, Alma Research, israel-alma.org is their website. Highly recommend that you follow it. Can't remember her name, lady that runs that, and she said, listen, this is a big problem because we're a small country and we need to be able to live from border to border, not with massive zones that are uninhabited. We keep shrinking our country, despite the fact that everybody says they're expanding it. So, big problem. Pray for those people. Pray for the leaders. Pray that the responsible people that were negligent or intentionally overlooked these things that were coming, that they knew about. Just pray that all that works out very quickly. Pray for people's safety. And then, as I said, I'll have a couple interviews I hope to put up midweek. So with people in Jerusalem and Israel. So let's pray. Lord, thanks for your day. Thanks for the information that you give us, Lord. Pray that you'll help us to take all of this to heart, to really understand the times in which we live and the shortness of the time, what appears to be the shortness of the time in which we have a mission to share the gospel with as many people as possible. Pray that you'll bless us this week. In Jesus' name, amen.